Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Layton Fitness podcast. Now in today's episode we are going to be talking about cardio, how and when to use it for fat loss, if even at all. However, before we dive into today's topic, if you are still yet to download my free ebook, How to Set Up a Nutrition Plan, if you go to jameslaytonfitness.co.uk, you'll see a link at the top of the page and you can download this immediately. This is going to teach you how to set calories, macronutrients, so protein, carbohydrates and fats, and also teach you how to manipulate these to help you achieve either your fat loss or muscle growth goals. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to be diving into cardio today. This is very much a grey area within the fitness industry, and for some strange reason people seem to associate more fat loss with cardio. However, we initially need to talk about the bigger picture of fat loss. So as I discussed in my Fat Loss Fundamentals podcast, we talked about for someone to continue to lose body fat, they need to be in a net energy deficit. Therefore, they need to be burning more calories than they're consuming. Now, this can be achieved by 1, increasing expenditure via cardio, or 2, decreasing total caloric intake, or a combination of both. In addition to that, we talked about how the weight training component of your training should be your main focus, essentially the hierarchy of importance within your training. The main reason being this is going to help you maintain as much muscle mass as possible during the fat loss phase. So you're probably wondering, how does cardio fit into all of this? Like most things in training nutrition, this depends. So essentially you could have an individual make some excellent fat loss progress with just weight training alone, while simultaneously having that individual track their caloric intake, their macronutrient intake, and you could essentially make manipulations to total calories to reduce body fat. Conversely, you could have someone else who requires more cardio to lose body fat. Therefore, this is an it depends question, and context will dictate the application. However, the goal is to have an individual perform as minimal cardio as possible. Because like I mentioned, our hierarchy of importance is our weight training. So by doing lots of cardio, we can impede our recovery from our weight training and thus potentially lose strength within our gym sessions and therefore lose muscle mass. Therefore, you're essentially adding cardio if and when required in a combination with reducing caloric intake. Therefore, it's paramount that you're measuring your progress. Not only you're measuring your gym performance, your caloric intake, your macronutrient intake, you're measuring your body weight. Every single week you're measuring your body fat percentage if this is available to you. You're doing progress photos, girth measurements using a tape measure. Then you can essentially add cardio if and when required. So as soon as you hit a fat loss plateau, this can be the time to either add cardio or decrease caloric intake. Now, where do we place this cardio? As I keep mentioning, because our weight training is our hierarchy of importance, cardio should not be immediately before the weight training session. Now, the reason being this can, again, impede our performance for our weight training. Therefore, again, potentially strength could be lost, and therefore muscle mass will be lost during the fat loss phase. Conversely, by placing this either at the end of the session or at another time of the day or on a completely different day, we keep that hierarchy of importance, trying to maintain that gym performance with regards to our weight training. It's also important to note you want to use the minimum effective dose. So if you do reach a fat loss plateau, perhaps you'll add a 10-minute HIIT session to the end of your weight training session, or 20-30 minutes of low-intensity, steady-state cardio using a very small dose. Then you're going to measure your progress for the following week, and then potentially you can add more cardio if and when required. But the key thing is we're using as little cardio as possible, one, so we're recovering sufficiently from our weight training. Also, another reason is to essentially give us more options to use if and when we reach another fat loss plateau. So for example, if we were just to do 7 days a week cardio, if we reach a fat loss plateau somewhere down the road, so potentially 2-3 weeks away, we essentially don't have any more room to play with. We're already doing cardio every single day. Therefore, by starting with the minimum effective dose, we can then measure our progress, and then when we reach another fat loss plateau, we can use another cardio session. So with regards to cardio type, there's a few variations. There's high intensity interval training, there's low intensity steady state, and there's also moderate intensity steady state. Now, contrary to popular belief, all of these have pros and cons. I know there's some of you with preconceived ideas that HIIT is superior to LISS or vice versa. But you need to realise that, as always, the context will dictate the application. So some great pros of, say, high-intensity interval training: you can burn a lot of calories in a short space of time. They can be very short sessions as well. They can be quite fun, and also they mirror weight training in the sense that with weight training you're doing short bursts of intense activity, then you're having a rest, then you're repeating. The same applies with high intensity interval training. You're getting a similar adaptation. However, it's important to note, just say for example we had an individual with a hamstring strain and they're prepping for a bodybuilding competition, and they're 3 or 4 weeks out from the show, they're already training their lower body twice a week. Do you really think it's necessary to put an individual on the treadmill to do 10 minutes of high intensity interval training? Quite obviously not. To say that one's superior to the other just ignores context. That's a good example. If you had an injury, quite obviously you're going to work around that injury by performing a different type of cardio. It's also important to note that high intensity interval training can be quite draining on the body. So again, if this impedes our hierarchy of importance, the weight training, then we could have a few issues. Therefore, you could use a combination of all of these, as well as reducing total calories. So that's just an important consideration. You want to overuse high intensity interval training. Now, with regards to LISS, low intensity steady state, obviously this is more time consuming. It takes a little bit longer to burn total calories. However, important point is it doesn't really require the body to recover in the same way as it does from a HIIT session. It's relatively easy on the body, it's easy to recover from, which can be a positive in the sense of maintaining our gym performance, our weight training performance. Therefore, both have pros and cons. Now, MIS is moderate intensity steady states. This could be a run, perhaps it could be a cycle at a moderate intensity for a moderate period of time, so anywhere between 20 to 40 minutes. Now, this can be a useful tool as well. However, it's important to note some potential interference adaptations within the body. So by doing this type of perhaps running or cycling, we could potentially gain more of a endurance adaptation, whereas obviously with weight training, which we're focusing on that strength adaptation. So this can have a little bit of an interference effect. Another great topic of debate is fasted versus fed cardio. Now, it's important to note with regards to fasted cardio, the evidence really isn't there, especially when you take into the net fat loss at the end of the day, so 24-hour mark, when an individual is also tracking their total caloric intake, their macronutrient intake. So, for example, Brad Schoenfeld did a very recent study comparing fasted versus fed cardio where caloric intake was actually matched. Essentially a relatively small sample size, but there was no significant difference between the fasted cardio group and the fed cardio group. I'd also suggest looking at my very good friend Joseph Agu's website, because he's got a brilliant article he released probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago on the topic of fasted versus fed cardio. And in my opinion, it's one of the best articles I've seen on the topic. So I'd really suggest checking that out. So if you go to josephagu.com, you'll be able to find the article. So that's the biggest misconception people miss when they're claiming that fasted cardio is superior to fed, is they get drawn into the acute fat loss effects of the session itself, whereas they don't really consider the 24-hour net fat loss at the end of the day when macronutrients and caloric intake have been taken into account. So just because there's more acute fat oxidation during the session, this is really regardless, because the goal is essentially to create that net energy deficit at the end of the day, at the end of the week, over a chronic period of time. So therefore, I would let preference dictate which one you use, whether you use fasted or fed. Now, it's also important to know if you choose fed cardio, your performance could be greater in the sense that because you've got food inside you, the performance of the cardio session itself may be better, and therefore, but you'll burn more calories. So conclusions and applications. So first of all, just remember that weight training is our hierarchy of importance. Make sure that's the foundation of your training. Use as little cardio as possible to reach your fat loss targets. When you do add cardio in, make sure you use the minimum effective dose. Then you can measure your progress on a weekly basis and then potentially add more cardio if and when required. The cardio type and duration really depends on the context, depends on the client, depends how long you've been dieting for. However, remember, put the minimum effective dose and measure your progress, and then add even more and or subtract caloric intake if and when required. With regards to fasted or fed cardio, there's no real benefit to doing fasted versus fed cardio. However, that's not to say that if you really enjoyed fasted cardio, you couldn't do this. Just remember, keep this away from your weight training session bout. So for example, it wouldn't be a very good idea to do fasted cardio and then immediately into your weight training. Just by default, gym performance is going to be decreased, therefore strength will be lower in the gym, and therefore potential more muscle mass will be lost during the fat loss phase. So if you're going to do this fasted cardio, make sure the weight training bout is several hours away. So I hope you've again found this very useful. Thank you very much for listening, and I will look forward to talking to you next week. So remember to download the free ebook, if you go to Layton fitness.co.uk, you can click on the tab at the top of the page which says free ebook, and this will be sent to you immediately. So hopefully now you've got a good understanding of how cardio can be used, how to use it if at all, and how it can be a useful tool in the right circumstances to move you to your fat loss goals.